What is going on, everybody? Welcome back. It is Dog Talk with your host, Holden. Glad to have you guys here with you as we get ready for another episode. Coming up, we have got Georgia versus Ball State is going to be the preview that we've got on tap for tonight. So make sure you guys are tuning in on YouTube. Go check out the YouTube channel if you guys have not already checked it out. But let's kind of jump straight into things. We've had a lot that's been going on over the past couple of days, not necessarily pertaining to Georgia, but Monday we had football games. You know, we met on Sunday and we had the review of that UT Martin game. Still had two games that proved to be large. One we knew was going to be on Monday night between FSU and LSU. It was the fireworks, everything that you wanted to see. And then Monday night had a game we didn't think would be fireworks, turned out to be. Now, this is a Georgia football podcast. We're going to get to Georgia football, but these games matter mainly because a couple of these teams, a lot of people around the country believe to be college football playoff ready teams. And I am one of those as far as FSU goes. I am a bought-in person believing that FSU is going to be one of those teams at the end of the year that is going to be playing for the college football playoff. This is my prediction preseason as the Final Four for the college football playoff is what it's going to shape up to be. Will this actually happen? I don't know. We got a long way to go. You don't really get to predict them first thing of the season and then find out immediately. You know, we've got a lot of weeks of football left to play before we know who's actually going to be playing in this. But I believe in FSU. I think FSU is going to be really good this year. I kind of put them more at like an 11-1, 10-2 kind of a season. Will that happen? I don't know. We're going to see. But they definitely started things off on the right track, taking down LSU in big fashion. This was a great game in the first half, back and forth. LSU has the lead, I think, like 17-14, something like that, at the half. Before the second half, FSU took off with it, like 31-0 run in the second half to really take over and dominate this game. And really, at the end of the game, mop-up duty, if that's what you want to call it, there was not enough time for a comeback as far as FSU had gotten the lead. LSU gets a touchdown late to just pull that within 7 points closer. It didn't matter. It was out of hand by then. I don't even remember what it finaled out at, like 45-24, something like that. I mean, it was ugly. It was ugly. FSU really pulled away there in the end and dominated that game. Then we fast forward, and that matters a lot because, again, you have the LSU game. LSU in my preseason pickings and the games that I was looking at, I had LSU losing one game, and this was the game I have them losing. They got to go 11-0 for the rest of the season for that to happen. Right now, I really don't know if that's what's going to happen. You know, you kind of expect some teams to take steps up in certain spots. Jaden Daniels looked exactly the same this year as he did last year. Looked exactly the same. I kind of expected him to be formed a little bit more. Some of watching Alabama last week, you did see that in Jalen Milroe, where he did look like maybe he has made some changes. But I didn't see that in an LSU quarterback. I don't know if they're going to stick with him the whole time, if they'll eventually go with, Musburger, I think is his last name, whoever the guy is that came in after him in the SEC championship game that last year against us. And really, it wasn't a step down for LSU. They continued to move the ball and really effectively, offensively and through the air with him as a backup. So not really sure what's going to happen there. I think the funnier part of it was more of Brian Kelly and listening to him talk. And really just kind of ramble. He is the coach I've realized that will put his team under the bus at any point in time. He will immediately throw his players under the bus as opposed to just taking it on the chin as a coach himself. Is what it is. But then we move forward to the next game. Again, Georgia Football Podcast. But Clemson, a team the past couple of years who's really been reeling, trying to figure out what it is that they're missing. And they haven't had terrible seasons. I think both of the past two seasons, they've still had 10-win seasons at least. I believe the year before it was 10. May have only been 9, but either way, they've had pretty good seasons. Hadn't been losing records at all. Last year, they thought they didn't have the quarterback situation figured out with DJ Uiagalelei. He ends up going to Oregon State, putting on a show in his first game there at Oregon State. Again, different competition, but nonetheless, they stick with Klubnik. He comes in Monday night, and Clemson's offense looked worse than it did last year, scoring 7 points against Duke. 28-7 was the final. 28-7. Maybe it was more than that. I think it was it. I think it was 28-7. They lost by 3 touchdowns to Duke at Duke. Something that we definitely don't see happen. But week 1 of the season, Clemson all of a sudden looks like they're out of the college football playoff talk. AP poll has come out. They're sitting at the bottom of it. I've never seen Clemson that low in the last 7 years, since they've really kind of come onto the college football playoff scene and been in that multiple years in a row where they're right there on the verge of getting in to that. So I really don't know, but those were two really good football games to watch. And some of that was Clemson shooting themselves in the foot on Monday, but I mean, defensively, Clemson is the team that you expect defensively to be able to stop teams, and they still have guys on defense. A lot of it was just offensively mistakes. Turning the ball over a couple of times in the red zone, can't do that. One was, I think, a drop punt. Can't do that either, especially when it's in plus territory for the team that you're playing against. But those were the two big games that we couldn't cover, obviously, since Sunday, so I did want to take at least a second and kind of run back over those because that's two teams, again, it's different. It's going to be different this year for all three of them, possibly. Potentially, LSU still has the opportunity to kind of get back in the game. They're not necessarily out. Clemson, to me, I don't know how they get back in. I don't know how they go 11-0, with exception to FSU when they meet here. I think end of this month they'll meet each other, and FSU's ranked really high right now. The AP poll came out, like I said. I don't know if I actually pulled it up here, but regardless, I'll try to kind of go by memory or looking at least through the top 10 of them, and maybe we'll look beyond that too, what the AP poll ended up lining up. But FSU's in a good spot, so Clemson's going to have to do a lot to kind of climb back into this. Let's get into some other news and notes. One of the other things that I'd seen, obviously, we've got all these clock and rule changes that are going on with the clock. The first down, we kind of talked about that. It really only shaves a few plays off the game total. But the thing that I've noticed, and I've noticed other people are noticing this as well, it's like we're making these changes to the clock and the rules with the clock, but the games still last either the same amount of time, if not longer, and that's because there's so many commercials, or ads if you're streaming games, that you still have the same 3.5 hour football game that you're watching. Nothing's sped up, really. It's just less time that they're actually playing football on the field. So it's kind of strange, but I don't understand why, if we're going to make these rules to try to shorten the game, why are we filling it with all this ad revenue? Is what it is. I know they've got to make their money, but I think they've made plenty. Just my opinion, but it is what it is. Let's get into some kind of crazy stats. I saw this on Twitter this past week. It's from Jonathan Williams at Dr. J. Will. These are some crazy 2021 stats. Blew my mind on some of these. And this is first, and there's 2 points to this. First point. If you played Georgia in 2021 regular season, you had a 62% chance of your drive either ending in a turnover or a 3-and-out. 62% of the time in 2021, Georgia's defense was so good that you either had a 3-and-out or you turned the ball over when playing Georgia. That's an average over the entire season. That's an average over what ended up being 15 football games throughout the entire season. You had a 62% chance of either turning it over or you went 3-and-out against that defense, because that defense was, I still, in my opinion, at least, and there's a lot of bias to it. So be it. What it is. Hey, we're Georgia podcast, right? But that's the best defense I've ever seen in my life. Not saying much because I hadn't seen a lot of football in my life. I'm younger than a few of you guys out there, but that's a stout defense. And then here's the other one that really blows your mind. This tells you how good the offense was doing, but also how well the defense stood as well, not allowing teams to score. If Georgia had done nothing, listen to this. This is the one that just went poof. If Georgia had done nothing but punt every single possession in the second half of every single game in 2021, Georgia still would have won 13 football games. Excuse me? In 15 games, the University of Georgia's defense was so good and their offense put up enough points to where in the second half of every single one of the games, Georgia couldn't have done anything but punt and would have still won 13 football games. Obviously, we know if you're actually playing the game, whatever happens after that, things might get a little bit squirrely if you truly just got the ball and kicked it. But regardless, you understand what I'm saying. That stat is mind-blowing. The entire season, the second half, if you did nothing but punted the ball all year long for the rest, you still win 13 football games? Blows my mind. Let's go back to some more stats from last year while we're kind of on this little rant rolling through it right here. And this will be the last I talk about the slow start from last week, because a lot of teams had that. But a couple of notes here. We had slow starts against Samford. We had slow starts against Kent State. We had a awful game overall against Missouri last year. It's okay if we start slow. And this is the thing that I wanted to make a point on. We started all those games slow, didn't necessarily win it by what we thought. But what happened on January 9th? You won another national championship. So we got to just chill out. That's all there is to it. All right, let's get to the AP poll real quick. Top 10 rounds out like this. Not really a lot of change other than really Florida State being the big one. Georgia went 1, Michigan 2, Alabama 3, Florida State 4, Ohio State 5. That was kind of the big change was they took Ohio State, dropped them a couple of spots. Florida State comes all the way from 8th. Alabama does jump up to 3rd. USC stays at 6. Penn State staying at 7. Washington jumping from 10 to 8. Tennessee from 12 to 9. And Notre Dame from 13 to 10. That's the top 10. Some of the other ones around the country, too. Utah is at 12. I'm kind of going down the line here looking at some of these other ones because they're not in order. Texas at 11. Oregon at 13. LSU 14. So that didn't fall too bad. That's what I mean. Clemson falls all the way down. I think it was 25th. I know Tulane's 24th. Yeah. Clemson at 25. So a little bit of a change up that's going on there. Most of it in the top 10 is what we're kind of going to focus on throughout the season because not a lot of it necessarily matters, again, until we get late into the season because of all these 10 teams right here, a lot can change. And a lot is going to change because there are teams that are on this list. They're going to play each other. Georgia's got to play Tennessee. Alabama's got to play Tennessee. These teams are all going to play each other. Ohio State, Michigan, they're going to eventually end up playing each other. So you have a lot of these matchups that are going to happen. Notre Dame, I think they're meeting up with Florida. I don't know if Notre Dame and Florida State, it doesn't matter. But you got a lot of these games that are going to match up. So this top 10 is going to fluctuate. So that's going to be the main part that we're going to pay attention to as we kind of play through some of these games going through. Let's kind of take a little bit of an injury update that I did want to look at least a little bit. See if I can get them to pull up here. Yeah, so this is what we kind of had. This was one thing I wanted to make sure we noted on this as well. Last week in the game that we played, and we talked about it a little bit, we're facing a lot of adversity as we come into this. A lot of players were missing in that first game against UT Martin. Kendall Milton did come in and play. We talked about this. He played at about 90%. Kirby sounds like he's starting to kind of get back up into shape. DeJohn did not play at all. Did say that if he needed to, he could have went in there, but there wasn't any point in putting him in the game. He's not in a black jersey, but he still has a brace on that knee. So I don't know what that means this week. It may be another let's hold out until we get to that next week. Smile Munden played. Kamari played. It sounds like both of those guys are getting back into shape, which is good. Dan Jackson played, so we're going to see all of those. He did say that Marcus Rosemy-Jacksaint we are planning to see him this week against Ball State. So that's good. That gives you another wideout to be able to throw to out there for Carson Beck, my goodness, almost blanked on a quarterback name. The one big one that's still lingering, and I don't have an answer to this. It doesn't sound like Kirby does either. Is Lab McConkey. Lab McConkey is battling a back injury that they say that has been nagging, and it's happened last year too, where he'll kind of be going and everything's fine, and all of a sudden it's almost like it locks up on him. So I really don't know when we're going to see Ladd. This could be something that really lingers deeper into the season than most of us expect, most of us anticipate. Now, I'd be glad to see him against Ball State. Trust me, the guy who brought back the most for you from last season, to be able to see him back on the field, that's exciting. That's what everybody wants to see. But we need him deep into the season more than we do these first few weeks of the season. So I'd much rather him take the time to rehab, get better, get healthy, and come back more at that 100% mark than say 90% that if we need him, he can come, but we don't have to have him at that time. Now, I know they said Brock Bowers was even dinged up, but that dude ain't going to come off the field even if you want him to. So that was kind of a funny thing to see, but that's understandable. I have not seen any other updates as far as injuries or anything like that goes, but I'll kind of keep an eye out and just keep an eye out on socials. I usually post if something like that was to come up. That way you guys can see it as well. So did want to say thank you guys for being here tonight. I'm glad to have you guys here. Looking forward to another episode with everybody. One thing, if you guys don't mind, if you are watching on YouTube, make sure you hit that like button. Make sure you hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. Did decide to actually do a hype video. I don't own, obviously I'm not there filming all of this stuff, and obviously the music don't either, but I just like putting a video together for people to be able to enjoy and be entertained by. So make sure you guys check that out as well. If you guys want to support the show, all of this is in the links of the description of the show. No matter where you listen, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, does not matter where you're listening to this podcast. All of the links to go to YouTube, Twitter, X, whatever, Instagram, Facebook page, everything. The Patreon to support the show, patreon.com/Dawg Talk, I think is what it is. All of the links, all you got to do is hit that link. It's going to take you to a link tree, and it's simple to click whatever link you want to go to, wherever, and you can do all of those things. So I greatly appreciate it, but I'm glad to have everybody here as we get into the show. Now, let's get into the deep part of what we're here to talk about. That's the Georgia and Ball State game that we've got coming up this week. And playing at 12 o'clock, we are playing on the SEC Network. Whoop, whoop. You don't have to stream this game. You get to watch this one from the comfort of your house, not having to stream it from wherever you guys have to stream it. Because like I said last week, I have to go somewhere to stream a game. Can't do it from my house. Don't have good internet. Don't have good signal. So sometimes it's hard to do this show in general, just getting it out. That's why I'm hoping next year we'll have better internet to where I can kind of do more and have more fun with this show and get you guys even more involved when that time comes. But we got to wait for that. So here we go. Let's get into the Georgia and Ball State preview. First thing, Georgia last week put on the field 559 yards of offense. Carson Beck had a great night. Again, yes, it started slow, but it ended fast. Everything ended great for Georgia. Again, a 41-point win you cannot be upset about. Carson Beck's stat line, 21 for 31, 294 yards, had 2 total touchdowns, 1 through the air and 1 running like Stetson Bennett of days of last year on the field. So I was glad to see this. I was excited to see what Georgia put on the field, and not concerned like a lot of us have been. And I'm not really sure why there's still concern out there that Georgia's not going to be able to put up points. You know, even back to 2014 in the conversation of Mike Bobo, Mike Bobo actually set the record for Georgia of points per game. I think we ended like 41 points something, so over 41 points averaging per game in 2014. So let's not put it all on Bobo. We put up 559 yards. No, we didn't do it in the first quarter, but we did it over the whole football game. It was a great football game. It was in the end a great football game. Nothing to complain about. So there's no need to do it. Ball State is not necessarily a team that is really scary. They weren't a very good football team last year. And I do think they had a pretty good game against Kentucky last week. I say that. I think the final was like 44-14, so it didn't seem that way. But the first half of the game was a lot closer than I think what everybody anticipated it being. I think for everybody, it was just a slow start. Michigan didn't have a fast start. They didn't end by a big margin either. It was fairly close in their game. Ohio State, same thing. Georgia, slow start, ended fine. Alabama, slow start, ended fine. All of these games had slow starts, but most of them ended fine the way they're supposed to. Everybody's knocking off rust. Everybody's trying to get back into the flow of things. And usually the first start of the season, that's kind of the way things go. So occasionally you'll have that Kent State of last year where you're not pulling away from a team like you anticipated. And I don't really anticipate that being much of an issue against Ball State this week. Ball State, like I've said in the past, don't think that they're a team that's really going to give you much of a scare, but they are a team that you can't just sleep on. You can't just show up in this football game and think that you're going to beat them 102-0 just because they're a MAC team. Doesn't matter. Ball State, again, 44-14, they lose to Kentucky last week, but they were able to throw the ball fairly, not well, I would say, but Carson Beck throws for almost 300 yards. We end up with 400 yards worth of offense as far as passing the ball goes. They threw for 223 is what they threw for against Kentucky. Didn't rush the ball quite as effectively, 72 yards, but their turnovers was the big thing against Kentucky in there. You take a couple of these turnovers away, all of a sudden this could be a little bit closer game, possibly even a 28-44, or maybe a 21, maybe just a 17. It could be the difference in 3 to 14 points in those turnovers. Never know how that goes when you're not actually seeing what happens with it. One of the big things that I want to see happen in this football game is I want to see the guys who are going to step up in these spots that we have slacking. You know, last week it was Mekhi Muse. He stepped up in a huge way. I mean, he had a career game as his debut for the Georgia Bulldogs. We saw it some in the spring, but it's different when you're in season in a game that does have records. Your records are kept on these games forevermore. It'll be going down in history as a game that you played at the University of Georgia, and the stats that you compiled in those games, they are going down in a book somewhere. So he stepped up in that. I want to see him continue to do that. Having Marcus Rosemary-Jack-Saint back, I think he's fired up and ready for this. I've heard so much about Dylan Bell as a guy who should be a workhorse out there for the wideouts. And again, we talked about this, I think, last week after we reviewed it, or maybe it was even a preview. And I look at the wide receiver room, and Kirby says we're actually a little thin there. Maybe it's in his eyes of, we've got guys who are not quite where we want them to be. I don't think we're ever going to be completely where we want to be with these guys, but we still have a lot of them. Again, Marcus Rosemary-Jack-Saint, you got Mekhi Muse out there now. You have, I just said him, Dylan Bell as another one. You have C.J. Smith, who, huge plays last week. And then you've got the couple of transfers in Rara and in Dom. And then if you ever get Ladd back, that's a lot of guys. And even with Ladd out right now, I want to see some of these other guys step up. Arian Smith, another huge one of the fastest dudes, I think, in college football. Let's see him step up in this position. And now that Carson, I think, again, kind of getting comfortable in that first half of the game against UT Martin, now with him kind of easing into things, same thing. Let's see him get in here and kind of ease into the football game again and start to kind of let it loose a little bit. I would like to see us run the ball more effectively as well, especially if Kendall's more at that 100% now. Again, don't really anticipate seeing much of DeJohn unless it's kind of like, all right, we got to have something, a little bit of a spark. Kendall was that spark for us last week. Roderick Robinson, he looked good too coming in the game as well. One of the fastest guys who I wasn't really anticipating showing up in that spot was Cash Jones. Watching him run kind of on the outside, I was like, man, that dude's quick. Roderick is too, but he kind of reminds me more of the, Elijah Holyfield kind of runner. He's that dude who's going to just bull run you right over. And you can tell with a lot of these guys, Andrew Paul too, they still have some learning to do, cutting here, which hole, which gap to run through. So there's still some learning curves that have to be learned in this, and that's all part of it. Again, playing at the collegiate level is different than playing just in a high school position there. But I still think Georgia is in a really good position here. This is not a game that I can dive too terribly deep into. Again, next week we'll kind of get to talk more and more about a team who truly should, honestly, on paper, match up a little bit better. Last week against UT Martin, Georgia's like a 50-point favorite. This week, Georgia's like a 42-point favorite. So you're still a really good favorite over a team that you should handle easily. That's the reason these lines are that high. Also, the reason I don't take the pick with the points anymore, and I told you guys that in the past. Anytime that I take Georgia and the points that they lay, don't go with me because it never happens. I'm fairly certain I have never gotten maybe one over the past 3 seasons that I've done this. When I take the points with Georgia, it don't happen. Don't know why. And it's probably more than that. But I really gotten to where I don't. I just picked that Georgia's either going to win it or lose it. And over the past few years, it's been pretty simple to say Georgia's going to win it. So it's almost like a lock for that. But, it's Ball State. I think you're not making any money off of it if you actually do anything to it anyways. But Georgia's expected to win this football game and expected to win it by big. So those, that's kind of all I have as far as what I feel about that. We can at least get to the keys to the game and see what I'm feeling on this. Some of it's similar to last week on the keys to the game. Offensively, Carson Beck, I put him in here again, and I know it's like, all right, what makes it a key? I want to see him this week get in that comfort zone a little bit quicker, get a little bit more comfortable in the pocket and do that sooner than it being, second half before he really starts to kind of lay into the game. So Carson Beck, I'd like to see him be a key to the game, getting comfortable early and starting to kind of open things up there with the playbook. Then stepping up in keys. This is what I'm talking about with these players. I want to see who's stepping up in these key spots that we've had missing. I want to see some of these wideouts step up. And with DeJohn still being hurt and hopefully having Kendall back more, you're going to see this. But with these other running backs, these backups, I want to see them get carries and be effective. Be effective on the offense is the other thing. And then defensively, I want to see some turnovers. Let's start to kind of create turnovers in this. Again, last week, Ball State had a couple of them in that loss to Kentucky. I think Georgia can kind of continue that, whether it's putting it on the ground. I think they fumbled it twice, neither of which were interceptions. But you can see that Ball State does like to throw the football, so I think this is a good opportunity for our secondary to get in that same defensive key there, being able to create turnovers. And then the last part of that is just don't get lazy. I think this is a key that you could put every week, but against these teams that, again, Georgia is expected to beat and expected to beat by a lot, I really don't. I think it's very easy for some of these guys to get lazy. The good thing about it is Kirby's able to kind of, he's kind of able to battle against that, because once – not really necessarily when he sees a guy get lazy, because most of that's not going to happen. But once the game starts to get out of hand, you have backups that are coming in. You got second string, third string. I don't know if they're even putting fourth string in there. It could be, because so many of the guys in first and second string get reps that you may as well be a first stringer even in the second string, because they're in there so early. I don't think you have to worry as much about the complacency as far as getting lazy, because these guys are ready to get in the game. And when they get in the game, there's not much of a step down. At least right now. That's in the ones and twos and possibly down to the threes. You got dudes on defense for sure, which is a good thing. So that's the keys to the game. This week I got Carson Beck offensively. Let's see him get comfortable early and open up that playbook, and then stepping up in key positions there. And then on defensively, let's see some turnovers, and then let's just try not to get lazy with the football. My prediction on it, I didn't get the graphic up, but I'll make sure to tweet this out as well as put it out on Instagram as well for you guys. But I've got it 52-3. I think that's how we're going to pick it this week. 52-3. I think Georgia starts to open things up offensively early, hopefully not creating the concern that everybody had this past week. But even if I could see this be a game where Kirby's like, Bobo, run the ball all night. Run the ball all night. And you win the game, I don't know, 35-7, something like that. A little bit closer, just because he's like, I don't care. We're going to win the football game. Hell, we got to win the game. I'm not worried about how y'all feel about it. But I feel like Georgia's going to kind of open some things up here. And then defensively, that wasn't a touchdown against us last year. Last week. I don't anticipate Georgia allowing that to happen this week. Could be wrong, but 52-3 is how I've got it picked this week. Now, let's get to some other games around the country, because there are some bigger ones that are going on around the country as well. And here's a few of them. A few of them are going to be in my picks of the week. You got Ole Miss traveling to Tulane. That's a 20th versus 24th ranked team. So Ole Miss traveling to Tulane. Tulane ranked in the top 24, top 25. They looked like a pretty good team last year. I think they upset a couple of teams throughout the season that wasn't necessarily anticipated. So that one I think is going to end up being a little bit of a bigger one. A&M is traveling to Miami. I think that one could be a good one as well. This is kind of, some of these are going to be, let's answer some questions. A&M we see as a team, and a lot of people are picking A&M to be pretty good. I am not. I still think A&M finishes around the bottom of the West, but that's because I don't think the West is terrible. I just think the West is down, which means you're not going to have like a bunch of 8, 9-win teams that are going to be on the West. I think you're going to have some 7s, some 6-win teams that are going to be over there in the West. You're going to have the 9 and even the 10, possibly even 11-win teams over in the West as well. But I'm not as high on A&M this season. And then you got some of the other big ones. Utah's traveling to Baylor. This is another one. Let's see what Utah truly is. I don't know if Cam Rising's back. Baylor did not look good last week. They lost to Texas State. Let's see if that was true or if that was a fluke. Kind of the same thing with Clemson. Clemson's not playing anybody this week, but let's see if Clemson bounces back offensively in a good way. Let's see if Baylor does this too, or if they lay down and you see, okay, they're just not a good football team this year. And that could be part of it. You got Notre Dame and NC State. Notre Dame expected to win this one pretty good, but NC State over the past couple of years has been a good football team. They're slowly kind of starting to trickle down back off of that. You don't see them in the top 25 anymore, so still think that's going to be a good game. Obviously, the one that everybody's talking about, Nebraska and Colorado, for the reasons of itself. Doubting Colorado, nobody, a lot of people were doubting what could happen, but everybody, I think, was excited for what did happen when it happened. And there's been some controversy around the game since then, just because, again, a lot of talking goes on afterwards. But right now, let's see if Colorado can keep this thing going. They're traveling to, or actually Nebraska's coming to Colorado. So this is the first game that's at home for Colorado. I know I saw a tweet that came out that Colorado's game, the cheapest seat that you can get is more expensive than the cheapest or the most expensive NFL ticket right now. That's not right though, because I know a box seat in an NFL game is much more. I think it's the latter. It was the cheaper and cheaper. The most cheap seat that you could get at the Colorado game right now is more expensive, like twice as expensive as the cheapest NFL seat that you could get right now. And it's going to be packed. It's going to be packed in Boulder as Nebraska comes to it. I've got Auburn over Cal, too. I think that's going to be a big one. That's where we're going to kind of get to the weekly picks. I don't think I got my picks in on my graphic. I don't, but that's not the end of the world. But, yeah, I did have that. Okay. But Auburn and Cal, I think that's the one. That's going to be a good football game, too. We've got football all day. All day. I love when – I used to hate when Georgia played at 12 o'clock. Because I was like, man, we play, and then it's like, yeah, I get to watch football for the rest of the day, but it's like, eh. But when we play later, I'm like, man, is this game ever going to, get here? And Kirby's kind of the same way. I know he's said before that recruiting when we play at lunch is good because you get these guys in here quickly. They get to watch the game. You get to spend some time with them afterwards, and then everybody goes about their business, and you get to enjoy the rest of your day. When it's a later game, those recruits don't get that time as much beforehand. When the game's over, most of the time everybody's kind of ready to go, especially last week. Like I said, that game still lasted 3.5 hours, even though it kicked off at 6 o'clock. I'm driving home thinking, okay, it's 8:30, right? And I look and it's 10 o'clock. I was like, oh, it's much later than what I thought it was. But nonetheless, that is what it is. To the weekly picks. Again, don't have the graphic. I'll tweet this out when I get it ready. But I got Georgia over Ball State, easy. First pick. Second pick, Ole Miss over Tulane. I'm not picking a spread on this one. I think I don't remember what it is. It's like 4.5, maybe. It's close to a field goal. But Ole Miss on the road at Tulane. This is going to be another one to me. Let's see what Ole Miss's offense actually looks like. Last year, again, they started off on fire, like 6-0, 7-0 starting the season, and then they fell apart at the end of the season when they truly started to run into some tougher opponents. Can Tulane be that first test of the season for Lane? No pun intended, but can that be a test for them starting the season? So at least give me Ole Miss over Tulane. Not picking a spread or anything on this one. Then we got A&M at Miami. Again, I don't think A&M's necessarily going to finish very well in the West, my opinion. This season I've got them closer to the bottom of the West, but I think they get the win here. I think this is at least a statement win for A&M before they start to really kind of dive into a little bit tougher. They've got ULM, I think, coming up after it, but then it starts to get a little rocky. You got Auburn, Arkansas, Alabama at Tennessee, and then obviously finishing out the season against some tougher opponents there. So things are going to get a lot tougher after they get past these next couple of games, but Miami's a good test for them. This is also a test to see, hey, Miami, are you actually something this year? Are you not? Every so often you get that little bit of a rallying up of, hey, Miami's coming back. The Texas, we're back. And it kind of fizzles. Nothing really happens. So let's see if Miami actually is anything this year, and let's see if Texas A&M is. I think this is a good time to put that up. So give me A&M over Miami, and I am going to take that -4 for Texas A&M in this one. I think they can beat them more than that. 6-7 points. I could see it right there at it. Then Auburn, I've got Auburn over Cal in this one. It's a close one, too. That one's 6.5 Auburn's way, and I'm going to take those points, too. I think Auburn can win by I could see this one a touchdown, yes, but I could see it more like a 10-point win for Auburn. But I could also see Auburn's offense all of a sudden coming alive like they did last week against UMass and really thumping Cal on the road. Again, that's a long way from home. It's a long way to travel. A lot later, playing at 10:30, I think, that night. So that's a little bit later into the night that you have that game going on there. But I'll still take Auburn over Cal, and I'll take that -6.5. So that is my weekly picks. The last big game that you have going on, and I'm not picking this one, is number 11 Texas at number 3 Alabama. That's going to be a huge game. It's game day. That one's happening at 7 p.m. But like I said, you get to watch Georgia at lunchtime. Get into the 3 o'clock slate. You got the Texas A&M and Miami game. A couple of other games, Nebraska and Colorado are also playing at lunch before that. But then as time kind of trickles, you get into that 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock time, and then you start to get that Texas, Alabama. Some of these other big games, Wisconsin, Wazoo, they're going to be playing later on. USC and Stanford playing that night. Don't think that one's going to necessarily be a big one. I expect USC to take care of business. But then you can watch Cal and Auburn late in the night too. That's a really late start for an Auburn football team. But nonetheless, that is what it is. So I hit the wrong button there. That's the right one. All right. We're going to wrap it up right there with it. You guys make sure you follow us on Twitter, Instagram, all of those things at DawgTalk20. And that's our preview episode. Again, come back Sunday afternoon, and we'll have the review of this game. Looking forward to seeing what the Dogs put on the field on Sunday. Hopefully, we don't have a bunch of complaining going on regardless of what happens. But whatever does happen, we'll check in with you guys once we come back for the reviewing of Georgia and Ball State. Go Dogs.